Welcome to this edition of SOLIDWORKS Manufacturing Live. My name is Dick Longoria, and I'll be your host for today's show. And what we're going to talk about today is how an organization might leverage digital transformation and IIoT in order to build a successful business environment. And joining me today, I've got a special guest, Matt Moseman of Develop LLC, and we're going to learn a lot about Matt. And I think his story is particularly relevant to today's discussion because this company is relatively new, and he has had to go through his own digital transformation journey in order to build this business. And I think it's going to be interesting for everybody to understand how a person actually goes through this process, right, Matt?
Yeah, exactly, Dick. Thank you for the great introduction. I'm excited just to kind of share our story and answer any questions along the way and really show what we've gone through. So excited to be here, Dick. Thank you.
Well, wonderful and welcome. And so, Matt, to kick us off, why don't you talk a little bit about, who you are, what your background is, and how you came about to launch this business, because and then we'll get into the digital transformation
Yeah,
component
that
of it, but
sounds
I think
great.
the background is really relevant.
Yeah, so mechanical engineer by trade, went to school for that. Grew up on a farm in the Midwest, Wisconsin. So really excited about just working with things and building stuff. So that's kind of, this traditional story of how you end up in mechanical engineering. Once I got into industry, though, my eyes were really open to what engineering can be and how it can turn into different businesses or opportunities. I had the opportunity to become part of Vortex Optics, and optics company that makes components for the consumer market, the military market, and they were going through a big vertical integration or transformation to bring parts from Asia to the US. And I got to be on that team to kind of see how that vertical integration was occurring and how to do that. And then after that, I had the opportunity to go to a company called Ring Brothers. That company, I helped actually lead the vertical integration. So we brought 1,000 SKUs in over the course of 4 years, built them a team. So they had control of cost, quality, timeline. And then the key aspect is having the ability to make more new products themselves. So they continue to scale their business. I saw the power that created for a business, and it was, how do we offer that to more businesses out there and build a business around that. So the way that Develop kind of came to be was that vision of doing that, and it's been a long road. It's not something that just happened overnight, because you don't start building $500,000 to $1 million pieces of automation equipment without a very talented team. So is how we stepped through getting developed there, and that's really where Dassault's helped us, because we've been able to use those products on our team and leverage that to build these pieces of equipment.
Well, fantastic. And when you talk about develop, what does a typical, if I can use that word, what does a typical customer look like to develop LLC?
Yeah, it's nothing too crazy. It's another manufacturing company that probably nobody else has really heard of, but you've probably interacted with their products. You've drank a beer where the label was made in a factory that we built equipment for. You've put electrical cabinets in your basement for powering your house, and components of that came from a machine we built, or a series of those segments. But really, it's an industrial manufacturing company somewhere in the U.S. Typically, a smaller business from, let's say, 10 million to 250 million is typically where we're dealing with a lot of our customers. But they're very proud to be making stuff in the America land, or if you will, right on our ground. So that's who we're servicing.
Okay, and fantastic. And you mentioned a little bit earlier that obviously you're using Dassault Systems products. Can
Yeah.
you kind of give us a little bit of a lay of the land in the technologies that you guys are utilizing, in your organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the process you get there too, Dick. We've been doing this for 10 years. So when we started, it was what's the most cost effective way we can get in there, and that's where at the time Dassault had the startup program. Since we were developing products, and we still are, we're able to get into that. So we got our first seat of standard SolidWorks to really just kind of get us started. But then now we've got 5 engineers using SolidWorks products, so SolidWorks Professional, and then they obviously have to have PDM Pro to link all that up because we're building a piece of equipment that have 10,000 plus components. So we have to have a server on site, being able to pull that stuff real time, and team members being able to collaborate is a big thing. And now recently we're bringing in SolidWorks Electrical, so we're routing our entire machines. We're pulling BOM lists off that and getting cabling links so we can automate that process. You know, we're an automation company that's doing these things for other businesses, but how do we automate more stuff internally?
Okay, very good. And when you start going down the path of saying, hey, what are the pieces of technology that I need to use? Um, that's something that I think people have a lot of interest in,
Yeah,
how did you determine what technologies you had to get in place? What was driving a lot of those types of decisions?
growth. So stuff breaks as you go through these growth curves. You start realizing that, oh, we have an inefficiency here of building the machine, or this isn't working the way we need it to. And then it's, how do you lean on your VAR and ask those questions, or how do you lean on your team that has more experience at this point than I do to kind of select those tools? But I think that the key is you have to get started, and then you start breaking the system, and then you start asking the questions.
And when you look at your manufacturing floor, what kind of equipment would people see in terms of the equipment that you guys use to build these machines?
Yeah, so we have Datron M8 Cube. So it's a CNC machine that we use for machining components out. It's not uncommon for us to have 300-400 unique components going into a machine that we have to machine out here. So that's a big thing that we offer to our customers, is that vertical integration. So we're outsourcing as little as possible. So that's where we've used the SolidWorks CAM as well, or CAMWorks, if you will, to automate that programming and then run it on a machine. We have another machine coming here in a couple months to help kind of pick up more of that bandwidth. Or another CNC machine. We have an SMT line in-house, so we actually assemble electronics here. So PCB assembly down to the board level we're also doing. Otherwise, it's just your standard kind of job shop stuff. Bridgeport style mill, sheet metal, brake
Yeah.
stuff, shear, and welding equipment. So really it's so we have to so we don't have to send stuff out. We can just empower our team to do as much in-house as possible.
Okay. And in addition to, software solutions that you guys have put in place, I remember our colleague and a friend of yours, I know, Mike Buckley, was telling me,
Yeah.
a while back, that there were last year or the year before, there was 500,000 robots sold in industry. Are you guys making use of robots, cobots, any technologies like that?
Yeah, we're an agnostic integrator. Really, we've done everything from FANUC, Epson, Dubot, UR. So we're deploying a decent amount of robots, and that's been ramping up. It's figuring out how we do more of those for our customers.
Okay. And for somebody who's going to go into that process, how do you identify, where you need a robot? How did you guys do that? What were the challenges that you were looking to solve, and how did you go about that process?
Are you saying how we decided on the robot, or how we decided to use a robot?
To use one.
Okay, yeah. So it's you have kind of two roads, whether you're going to go down designing a custom piece of equipment that is going to do those tasks that a robot could do. So it's a very broad question to try and answer, and it really comes down to the customer. So we spend a lot of time understanding what our customers' visions are, what their long-term goals are, and that's really, you asked the typical customer question earlier on. And so really, once we've gotten that customer, or we've started helping them down the journey, we want to understand their business and then solve the problem that's appropriate for them. If they know that this machine is going to be something that's only going to have to make X number of parts for a couple of years to solve a short-term problem, we're probably going to figure out how to spend as little on engineering and components and give them a cost-effective solution. And that might be a robot, or it might be a simple pneumatic cylinder doing a process, but that's very
Okay.
project or customer specific, and we need to understand that customer's needs to properly address it.
Okay. And so when you look at your organization and the way that you built this, how long did it take to get started, Matt? I know I'm kind of backtracking a little bit,
Well,
but
That's
I mean, from your history with previous organizations, and h- how does an entrepreneur in the manufacturing industry, with a 3D printer or a machine, a CNC machine, and a dream get started?
yeah. It was 5 years of moonlighting. So this was not something. I'm not an overnight success. I'm not going to try and make it seem like this stuff happened very quickly. It was a 10-year journey to get us to today, but it was 5 years of just chasing stuff after work. I couldn't get enough work at work, so I'd come home and I'd work another full shift basically until that kind of cascaded to a bunch of projects running in parallel where we needed to scale this into something bigger. So that's really where it started. It was my mom's basement way back when, and then it moved to my basement when my wife and I built a house. And how we went about that. So it was 5 years of that, bought a Datron, then started chasing stuff around that, and then slowly started hiring more people, had them working out of my basement until the state of Wisconsin or Dane County didn't like how many people were in my house. I then got a 10-day eviction notice from the state of Wisconsin to move my business. And then what's interesting is that was an awesome catalyst. It was like this, it was those little trickles like, all right, this thing's real. We've got people, but it was a catalyst that from our customer side, they saw us as being very real all of a sudden. I didn't realize how putting a vinyl sticker on a commercial door made such a difference versus being in your basement. Like all of a sudden we were very tangible to people that wouldn't do business with us, and all of a sudden stuff started just taking off.
That's one of the things that you don't realize until you get into it, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't understand some of the challenges that are for an entrepreneurial type of venture, what it takes to succeed. So sometimes it's just the school of hard knocks, getting up every day and doing it even when you don't feel like it, right? There's a lot of those days too.
It's discipline for sure. Yeah. Having grown up on a farm, my dad's a veteran. There's a lot of structure in that household. So discipline definitely plays a role.
Well, thank him for his service for us.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things we were talking previously, prior to this show, you had said something to me that kind of resonated,
Okay.
and you said the best way to solve a problem is to make it bigger.
That
Can
it
you
is.
talk about that? What you mean by that?
Yeah, oh, it's always easy to try and solve certain things or chase a lot of problems. And what I've found is the best way to solve those, I realize I'm just answering your question with kind of reiterating it, is to make those bigger. And I'm going to try and give some examples here. As you're growing as a small business, you start seeing challenges across the board of like, this process isn't quite working, but I'm still not sure. And there's that point where it's like, do I dig into this, or do I just make the problem bigger across the board and then start seeing where it starts breaking? So we're going through this right now as a team. In the last 12 months, we went from a team of 5 to a team of 13. We used to do daily stand-up scrum. Everybody would come in and we'd have kind of a round robin, if you will, and everybody would talk about what their weekly/daily goals are and how we were going to accomplish those. Now we've got multiple projects running in parallel. We actually have departments in our company, and that system isn't working anymore. There's communication of what priorities really are, what direction people should be going. If something isn't going to get done because something's taking priority over the other, what is that supposed to look like? So now we're going to project, department, and weekly meetings. And what that really looks like is every week the projects get together to look at what the GANs are looking like, what the risks are associated with that project, and what we really need to tackle or what our goals are. The departments are kind of doing that same thing on how those projects are impacting them, but then other issues they're having and other continuous improvements they're looking at. And then the weekly stand-up or prior to our team lunch that we also do, which is a really fun story I'll share at the end of this. We go through the process, make sure that everybody's up to speed on questions of other projects, other departments. So there's this less confusion on the entire team. At least that's the way we're going about it, trying to address that system that's breaking for us. And then something cool about like I said, the weekly lunch is we started something in 2020 when we came from a smaller community or smaller town. We've now moved to Madison, Wisconsin, but that small town only had so many restaurants in it. And they started closing their doors during COVID. So we had always liked doing team lunches where everybody would have lunch at the same time. You know, it was 4 or 5 of us. Now that culture is carried throughout the team. We still cater in a weekly lunch. We bring the team together for sure on that week basis to, you know, support another small business local to us to buy food from them, but then also to get the team to collaborate again and just kind of have some fun around the week.
So that process sounds like it's kind of a critical piece of helping you identify, hey, what are the challenges we're really dealing with? Is it bigger than what we thought it was? And now that we've made it bigger, what are the technology tools that we might need to solve this? I mean, it might be technology tools, it might be skill sets, right?
You nailed it. Yeah. So that was problems that we had in the past was managing those larger projects. So that's where PDM Pro came into place, is how do we manage that and build a process around that so we can have our mechanical, electrical, and CNC department collaborating across the board within one machine. And now it's how do we link all our Gants and get visibility of spots where somebody might be overbooked in a resource base.
And that kind of dovetails into another topic. And I think we talked about this previously. Let's talk about SCADA systems, and visibility to what's actually happening on the manufacturing floor. You're building these machines that may have 10,000 parts or more.
Yeah.
How do you guys go about managing a project of saying, hey, when that customer calls and says, Matt, what's the timeline on my machine? Are we on schedule? Are we off schedule? What's
Oh
the,
yeah.
how do you answer those customers? What kind of technologies are you using in order to accomplish that?
Yeah, that's those technologies is making sure that our team has visibility what those are. So simple GANs that Microsoft tools provide for us, or aspects of that. But I think the biggest tool that everybody always loses, and with all these other digital aspects that everybody's bringing in, is we've still got the cell phone today. So it's, you know, our customers have come to realize that it's not uncommon if there's a challenge or if there's something that's coming up, you're just going to get a call from Matt or somebody on our team, because that's still one of the fastest ways to do that. And then you're going to get an email just reiterating what we covered. But that's really one of the biggest tools on that aspect, is making sure that, we give candid responses. We keep our customers updated on real-time exciting things. Like we've got a machine out here where we just hit a huge milestone where we're actually putting their parts into their system and hitting specs. Like that's just a huge milestone. Like I send them a video of it. It's not edited. It's not quality, but to everybody that knows what that video is, it's exciting. And then the other aspect you asked is, the SCADA systems. That's once the machine's on their floor. So how are we getting data from what's happening on their floor and presenting that to a dashboard for them? So we use we've built out HMIs that run on a panel PC. We then use our controls, Node design, to capture real-time data from those machines to give them a dashboard via Power BI. And so they can see what's actually happening on their machines real-time. Really, CEOs, operators of businesses are wanting to know, am I making parts? Am I making quality parts? And is that machine yielding me a return on investment? And then are we tracking when I'm going to need maintenance so I keep making money on that thing? So we give them those visibility points, and then we offer just different security levels depending upon whether you're a CEO, you see certain things. If you're a maintenance technician, you get different visibility, and then if you're a developer, we can look into other aspects. So we can give remote diagnostics too. So if a machine goes down, our team can get a phone call. All right, we need to log into your machine. We're going to start looking at what's going on, see error codes that were tripped, if that's a thing that's happening. And sometimes it's, you've got this portion jammed. Looks like we failed something here, or something was placed incorrectly that caused a crash. Now let's back that out, see if we can get you back up and running, and what parts need to be sent if there's an issue.
Exactly. And with projects of that size, do you guys would you classify yourself more of an engineer to order type of organization? Every project is different.
Yeah, that's a really fair assumption there, Dick. We're an engineer to order. It's getting more streamlined because we're getting a lot more people that are wanting packaging and palletizing, putting stuff in a box, putting that box in a pallet. But at the end of the day, the real engineering comes from what your part is or what the customer's product is that we've got to work with. And that's where the engineering occurs that makes it custom for each customer.
Is it common for these types of projects to go through changes, during the production process, or are they pretty much set from the beginning to end?
Yeah, so in the past, I would say the changes were more frequent. We've gotten a lot better at communicating with our customers, taking a lot more time to vet those needs out. Uh, the biggest risks have happened in the past where customers were changing products upstream, weren't communicating that, or we didn't know the right questions to ask in the past. And so now it's like I said, that cell phone. It's just making sure that communication is more frequent, and you're asking those right questions so we can help our customers maintain that timeline because of things that we've seen with other projects in the past.
And when you think about a project, I mean, when you start, I mean, there's a process you go through, right? You speak to a customer, you identify what they're trying to accomplish, you come up with some sort of scope of what that project is. You go through, a sales process, right? What does the front end of the business look like? How do you manage the front end of the business, and in terms of the sale process and
Yeah,
capturing the information the customer is giving to you?
I really like talking about that side. That's the side of the business that energizes me the most. I really enjoy. I don't view it as sales, but that's really what it is. I view it as education for our customers because that's what our customers have come to see our process as. Is we come in and educate them, and throughout that process, we're just understanding your business. So our flow typically takes 6 months to up to 2 years. We've seen that process take because we're just really understanding what our customers need and how we can best service them or how a machine can make them money. Because at the end of the day, they're investing $500,000 to $1 million plus onto a piece of equipment. We want to make sure that that machine is going to yield them dollars or return on investment, because we're not looking to sell one machine to a customer. Our goal is to build long-term relationships. How does this first machine get done? Then how in 2 years we build another machine? And then we look back 20, 30 years in the future here. We're looking back going, oh my gosh, we've done 10, 15 projects together that have yielded X ROI and helped grow your business, add jobs to your company, and just really build your dream out. That's the fun part for me, is how do I help build all these other businesses' dreams for themselves or help them reach that vision.
Okay, fantastic. And I think about your organization. You've been in business for about 10 years, maybe, really ramped up after the first 5 years. And one of the big challenges in business historically has been that term called as economies of scale. That basically states that if bigger is better, right? I have greater buying power, I have greater this or greater that, which gives a larger organization an advantage
Yeah,
over smaller organizations. But technology is an incredible equalizer, right?
it is.
That isn't necessarily true anymore. Can you talk a little bit about what makes an organization like yourself be able to compete against companies that are 5, 10, 100 times larger?
Yeah, that's a process that we found that's really helped us compete is we bring in engineers that may have just graduated from college or have a couple of years of experience, and we really empower them to run our projects, get stuff going, and bring in the tools that they know that are relevant. I mean, I've been doing this now for over a decade. I'm already getting stale, let's say, on what's new. So it's leaning on those younger team members that have really good ideas, and they just need the opportunity to execute them. And that's what we're seeing is helping us really compete, is you know letting them have the freedom to use those new tools and show me or show the rest of the team what can be done with them.
Okay. And so when I think about a manufacturing organization, one of the things I think about is procurement and buying materials. big part of your business, right? There's a
It
lot of
is.
money wrapped up to sitting on a shelf waiting to be utilized. When you look at your organization, when you acquire materials for a project, do you typically buy materials and put them on a shelf, and those materials are consumed by any project that comes in,
Oh, okay.
or are they assigned 100% to a specific customer? How do you guys account for that on the
Yeah,
backside?
you're looping. So a conversation we had earlier in here is systems that we need to, or problems we need to make bigger, so we can really solve them. This is one of those that's occurring right now here too. So we have the standard inventory of what you can carry throughout projects. So whether that's fasteners, pneumatics components, that's been a process where we've had smaller inventories, and now we're going to, all right, how do we Kanban that? How do we create ticket orders? So once we've got down to that red bucket, we make sure to order more. That's one system of it. And then the other is very project specific. So if we're buying a robot, we're not inventorying a robot. If we're buying a Sagino drill or a Costa, a capital piece that's going in that automation equipment, a vibratory bowl feeder, it's usually very specific to that machine. So that gets segregated or separated into its own inventory process. And the way we go about that now is we don't start building machines until all inventory has been accounted. So we build everything as kits. So those large components come in, robot, stuff like that. The machine components start coming in. We then start building out these kits on shelves. So then we start pulling from our other inventory and building those out. And then once everything's put on carts, bread trays, all the components, unless there's like one lingering item, that's kind of the exception. Like, all right, this supplier, we know that we're waiting on this piece of equipment. It's going to take a little bit longer. That'll be acceptable to start without, so we don't end up with a bunch of stuff that's partially assembled. So then our process can go, how do we build this machine as quickly and efficiently as possible, and start pulling those carts on the floor and just make it a reality. To give you an idea, we've compressed that build schedule on machines from being in the 6-month schedule to now being sub 2 months in just the last year.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, as you kind of go through the process of building your organization. When you think about where you are today and where you would like to take the business, um, what kind of technologies are you considering that maybe you don't have today, but you think you're probably going to need? This question is kind of coming from, let's say, a manufacturing ERP perspective.
Yeah.
I don't remember where develop is in that piece of your journey, and what are the trigger points for you of saying, hey, you know what, we probably need to think about this.
No, you're spot on. That's one of those we're trying to make bigger, because currently a lot of ERPs or systems like that, just the cost to deploy them, the cost of the software to do it, we haven't scaled to be where we quite need to be. And so we're currently evaluating different ERP systems. What's the right solution for our business, and what are the costs associated with that to do it correctly? Because there's always the question of, what do we need now? What's the right solution? What are we willing to compromise on to get us there? So it's always kind of that living system. So we're currently gathering the knowledges on those ERP systems and how to best tackle that.
Okay, very good. I did notice we do have a question in
Oh
our
yeah.
chat. Um, and this was probably maybe kind of takes a step back to kind of the beginning, but it's a question of how do you decide the first step or method to draw a 3D model from a 2D drawing. And maybe I'll take the first stab at this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technologies out there. There's a lot of really good uses for 2D drawings, no question about it. One of the things that SolidWorks did over 25 years ago was kind of revolutionize how companies can draw in full 3D in a really quick and easy fashion. And so for me, maybe it comes from complexity of geometry, maybe complexity of the designs. I always find a reason to do it in 3D because it's just as easy for me to draw a plate with holes in it that's going to be punched, or laser cut, as easy it is in a 2D. For me, it's just as easy. And you model up, throw a few holes in it, dimension it, and you get your orthographic projections, automatically. I mean, how do you view it, from your perspective, Matt?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate the question here. So, how can we decide the first step or method to draw a 3D model from a 2D drawing? Um, how can we decide the first step or method? So, to me, I take that as, all right, we're looking at a 2D drawing that needs to go to 3D. I know our team has several processes of that. You can really just bring that 2D drawing right in as an image. And then typically you're going to have your different views as well. And then you can overlay those and just bring those into sketches. So again, it kind of comes back to that complexity that you said, Dick, and then how you want to go about it. But that's the way we've done it. Like, it's not uncommon for us to be working with a supplier and we need 3D CAD, and we just can't get the 3D CAD for it. They make the components, they just aren't willing to share the CAD. So then, hey, here's a 2D drawing, and now we have to try and get something that's accurate. And that's the way our team's gone about it.
I think about where you guys are at in your evolution, and over the course of the last several years, Dassault Systems has really been talking a lot about taking a platform approach to the future, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think about the 3D experience platform and how companies can take advantage of it, I mean, even considering your organization, and you were talking about how you communicate with customers, how you collaborate during the process. It's still just as easy to pick up the phone and engage with them. And I'll bring our shared colleague Mike Buckley up. When he was industry, he was using the platform for collaboration
Okay.
and capturing all of the interaction with the
Hmm.
customer in a specific, let's say, community for that customer.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
and so it would give both you and the customer the opportunity to engage online via the cloud, talk about the project, drop in your geometry, your red lines, whatever you want. You could collaborate in real time and say, okay, here's what the proposed change is. What do you think about it?
That sounds
And
really
if
exciting. Yeah.
and if the customer likes it, basically their sign off is right there. So you don't have to go back and dig for an email, find an email or a
Yeah.
voicemail message and say, hey, where was that approval, right?
Yeah. I didn't know a certain tool like that was in existence, because it really creates a timeline. The thing that we've joked about is, I'm sure everybody's probably ordered from Domino's, and you can kind of get that timeline approach of, uh, Jim's making your pizza now, Helen's delivering it, it's on its way, and it kind of gives you that timeline as it cascades through the process. It's like, how do we make that for automation equipment has been a conversation we've had here, because we really like transparency with our customer. We found that the more communication we have with them, the more information we can give to them about what's happening with their machine, the better. Because high capital investment, high risk investment, there's a lot of moving parts, and like you said, minor change orders that are just inherent to it that are going to come through the process. And so making that as fast and seamless as possible is really critical.
Well, yeah, no question. And there's so much technology out there, right? And like you said, sometimes when you're busy running an organization and making sure that the lights stay on, you know, you kind of get a step or two removed. And so you mentioned the importance of relying on your people to help, you know, keep, give you the visibility to what's really out there. So, and that's also part of my job, Matt, is
Yeah.
make sure I give you that information.
It sounds like we should
uh,
have a conversation after this about some of those tools.
we certainly will. And one of the things you mentioned is how you rely on your people. Another big topic in the manufacturing industry that's a challenge for everybody everywhere is staffing and hiring, qualified people. What has your experience been like? Is that a challenge for your organization as well? And if so, and or how do you address that? And how do
Yeah.
you manage that?
You're saying the challenge of hiring?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we were in the smaller town, so 15, 20 minutes uh, north of here is Sauk City, where I grew up. That's where the business used to be. We would have positions open for many months. We couldn't fill the positions. We made a strategic decision to move the business to Madison, Wisconsin, which is the capital of Wisconsin, because we thought that there was going to be a better chance of hiring people. We found that decision was very good for our business. We've been able to fill positions very quickly. I can use some very real numbers from our last job opening that we filled. We posted the job. Within 48 hours, we had over 250 applicants.
Wow.
We narrowed that. I think it was like 260 something is when I finally just cut the ad off and said, all right, we need to dig through these. We ended up with 19 people we wanted to interview. So 19 qualified people that we felt fit our metric of what we were looking for that role. We then interviewed all 19 of those team members and hired the best candidate for the job. And we moved them across the country to here. I guess they ended up moving across the country to be a part of our team. And we really share the vision too. So we show where Develop, currently is. We don't hide anything. We're a small business. We're, just got out of a basement a couple of years ago, if you will. And we're now scaling very quickly in Madison, Wisconsin, and sharing where we're going and how we empower those team members and what those expectations are. So we show them what their role is too. So we show them the responsibility that we're expecting from them out of the gate. And typically it's a good amount of responsibility. And that seems to excite a lot of people out there.
Well, that's refreshing to hear too, right? Because the statistics in the manufacturing industry is that there's 4 or 5 million roles that need to build between now and the next 5 to 7 years, and only half of them are going to be filled. So
it's concerning.
It is concerning, right? And unfortunately, you found a way to help solve that problem for yourselves. And maybe it's not always that easy, but you did mention proximity and location really plays a role in that. When I think about investments in technologies and the time that goes into identifying what is the problem, what are we trying to solve, and then coming up with various solutions.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for other companies that are earlier in their process, or even mature companies, on how do you avoid or limit your mistakes in choosing solutions or vendors, to solve a problem at your organization? What have you guys done? How have you guys approached
How do you said, how do you avoid mistakes on
Yeah. How do
software?
you limit them? How do you limit mistakes, right? We all make mistakes.
I think that you're gonna make mistakes. That's just the facts. There's gonna be mistakes, and you have to move forward. I think it's the biggest mistake that I think a lot of people get hung up on, and we see the same thing with helping people deploy automation equipment. Is it's the fear of making the mistake then makes them make the real mistake of not making a decision. So eventually you're just going to have to trust somebody. You're going to have to trust that sales team you've been working with. You're going to have to trust yourself that you've done the research and the due diligence. You have to trust your team that they've dug into it and given you the real answers. And you just have to move forward. That's really it. You do your research, you trust the people that you've done that research with, and you make that decision and you commit. And once you've committed to it, you execute that until you see that you've hit a pass. You've scaled the problem into its point where it's too big and now you need to look into a different direction, or it's not delivering on what those expectations were out of the gate of what you set for that project. And then you treat it as how you're going to move forward.
Okay, very good. When you think about where you are today, what's the future look like? What's the next big step in your evolution?
Yeah, so I have a huge passion for creating, like I said, that kind of growing other businesses, but part of that is just creating really fun jobs for people, empowering them that they're excited. So the long-term vision, if you kind of look at where Develop's going, we have the short term, the goal is how do we figure out how we can build and deliver one machine a month, not building the machine in that month, but over a year, how do we deliver really 12 machines? But then once we zoom further out from that is how do we get the business to really break 100 million in revenue? It's been the big metric that we're chasing. And so the goal of that is by the time I hit 40 is kind of that timeline we've set as a fun metric or a way to go about it. So that's 7 years from now is really our goal to get there. And so how do we cascade to get to those events? Because if we step back on that, what that looks like is we're looking at a team that's going to be roughly 400 team members to deliver that level of automation or that number of projects and engineer to order systems that we're doing. So that's where it's really exciting for me is we've got 400 empowered team members that are really excited about this vision that we've been talking about for a long time.
Wow, that's that's a great goal, right? I mean, and target for you to hit over the course of the next 7 years. And when I start thinking about scaling an organization that big, you start thinking, okay, what are all the things that have to happen in order to make that dream become a reality? And I go back to thinking, you've got to have vendors that you can count on, vendors that you trust. Um, you know, I mean, there's a supply chain issue that's been out there for the last 6 years. It's been one of the
Oh yeah,
hottest
it's
topics.
rippling.
What has your experience been with the supply chain issue? Has that impacted your organization as well?
Yeah, it has, and it's interesting. It's been unpredictable. There's been a couple things that are very predictable that we know just always have delays on certain supply points. That's fine when you can predict them. It's perfectly acceptable that we just know these things just always take longer than we're forecasting or what our suppliers say to us. That's fine. The problems come from when you are told that, let's say, a motor driver or a piece of control or electronics equipment is going to be delivered next week, and you've been told that for the last 3 months. It's been getting manufactured. This is your queue in there. And then all of a sudden you get an email that's like, hey, you know how we said that was going to take 3 months? You were going to get it on this date. Guess what? It's going to take another 9 weeks, we think. And then that's like, all right, we've planned for that. The machine's ready to build. What do we do there? Now, that's a big pivot because as a small business, that impacts your cash flow. When you're building small, or when you're only building so many machines, that's a large resource shift on your entire team. So now you're trying to pivot that around. So that can definitely be a challenge that you can't predict.
Yeah, and you mentioned something pretty really important there was cash flow. When you think about organizations, I actually just listened to some industry analysts just the last day or two, and I think overwhelmingly the most common concern for scaling any business is cash flow.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
I mean, when you want to grow, you eat cash. I mean, it's you eat it or burn it, whatever you want to say. You're deploying that into your processes. You're buying new tools. You're buying new equipment because if you're not using those profits to go back into buying new equipment, you're peeling it out and your business isn't growing. And for me, it's not been about how much cash this business can generate for me so I can go out and buy the toys I want. I see the long-term vision of what we can create as a team. And so it's, for me, since I've started this over the last 10 years, I've taken very little out of this business. I think it would be very surprising to a lot of people how little's come out of this business. And it's all been based on that long-term vision of getting the entire team there.
well, no doubt, and historically, one of the ways that companies have been able to grow their business is how do I increase manufacturing capacity? And the solution used to be pretty easy. You add some floor space, you buy some more machines, and you add more people, and your manufacturing capacity just increased, right? But floor space is expensive, machines are expensive, and many times people are hard to find.
Yeah.
And so organizations are looking at ways of really measuring, am I getting the most out of my machines? Um, you know, uh, do you guys have a good grasp on, let's say your OEE numbers and, the performance metrics of your
What's an
machines,
what's an OEE number?
like overall equipment effectiveness? Like, for
Okay.
example,
Yeah.
if You know,
Yeah, so really the equipment we have on the machines are tools to best aid our engineers. So effectiveness of a CNC machine is not a metric that I'm constantly tracking or as concerned about as most manufacturers are, because we're the engineer to order business. The key is to make sure that our engineers have the tools they need to be as effective as they are. So that's the metric that we're tracking, is how do we continue to yield more machines out the door with the existing team and increase their efficiencies is really the metric we look at. Now you're still using CNC equipment if we want to go back into that. So it's what tools does, let's say, our CNC machinist or manufacturing team need to make sure that they can automate as much of that upstream as possible. So when they go to the machine, that's not clunky.
oh, okay, makes entire sense, and that's probably one of those specific differences between, let's say, a more repetitive manufacturing environment versus an engineered order that
Yeah.
deals with changes on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I don't lose sleep when the CNC machine is sitting like idle. It's like, no, I know that stuff's coming. It's the concerning point is when you're running one machine and that machine is running all day, all night, and that's for a long period of time. And then your concern is, I really hope we don't have an issue because we need all these parts for this machine to maintain timelines. So that's where the redundancy, like I said earlier in the call, is why we've bought another machine, is to create those redundancies. And that's been kind of the same thing across the board, because the team needs redundancies. Like you said, what are the metrics there is, if X team member's not here and they're the only one that knows how to adjust cabling on it, but the software on that machine, but the software engineer needs something adjusted for them. Who's the backup plan? Who comes in and does that and knows enough about the machine to maybe not do it as efficiently as Robert on the team could, but they can read the schematic and make those changes as needed.
Matt, we've been talking for almost getting close to the top of the hour.
That one quick.
When you think back and you look at your journey,
Yeah.
both from starting this business to growing it to adding people, I think there's probably going to be a lot of people who watch this video who are maybe where Matt was 10 or 15 years ago, and they've got this idea or this dream, and they're wondering whether or not you know, they should take the first step in pursuing that, or how to do
Oh,
it. What advice would you give,
oh,
someone who was where you were, you know, when you were
yeah.
thinking about launching this? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a very insightful question, because I've had a lot of mentors along the way. There's been a lot of people that I've leaned on or posed questions. I think the one comment that still resonates to way back when I was looking at starting a business and going down this journey is, my dad and I are very close. Grew up on the farm. We still spend a lot of time on weekends together doing stuff there. And the one thing he said is, he's like, this is your chance. If you don't do it now, you more than likely never will. So that was when I was, let's say, younger, more high energy, and had the opportunities to take on a lot of risks. So it's when the opportunities prevail, you have to decide if you're going to jump. You're not going to have all the information. You've just got to trust yourself and go get it. Like that's been it. And then maintaining mentors along the way and continuing to make sure that those mentors change as you go through it. So my dad's helped me a long portion of that. I still bounce ideas off of them. But then recently, over the last year, I've brought in a board of advisors that everybody on that board, it's 4 team members. They've all scaled a business north of $100 million and gotten to that point. Now they've retired. They've kind of exited, either own a portion of it or they're completely out of business at this point. But they've figured out how to go from small business to big business, if you will, on that level. And so now it's bouncing ideas off of that. So first jump, but then make sure to ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I mean, I've made a pile of mistakes, and the best way to avoid some of those mistakes is ask people that have gone through that journey. And that's where, having those mentors or being able to lean on people. So I'm open to answering questions too. For a lot of other small businesses, I still like to give back to that and help other people that are looking down this journey.
Thank you for that insight. I agree. I always kind of thought about it this way. I mean, back in the day when I had a business as well, and having gone through that as what you had gone through, it's kind of like, what's the worst that could happen, right?
Oh yeah, we
The worst, you lose some money, right? I guess you start over.
yeah, that's exactly it. It's yeah, it's quitting your job can be a scary day. That's definitely one of those. It's interesting. I had a kind of couple things that cascaded that made it a little bit easier for me, but either way, making that decision is still very tough because it puts at question where that next paycheck is coming from, and most people have bills to pay.
No doubt. And but I think you also said something critically important, and that you put together this team of advisors. And I think for people who are listening, is there is a difference from launching a business and growing it to become stable and successful
Mhm.
versus taking a significant jump, because the
Exactly.
skill sets that require, to grow it are completely different.
Yeah, and that's I go into the meetings and I'm very transparent, guys. I've never been here before. I've never gone where we're going. I know everybody at the table has. What am I doing wrong? What do I need to be looking at? Beat me up. I mean, growing a business shouldn't be about maintaining your ego or how you need to perceive yourself. The goal is to get where you want to be and lead your team there. So admit your mistakes and own what's going well, but then give the successes to the team when they're deserved too. So you got to celebrate those with the team and share the losses.
No doubt. And let's face it, I mean, having good people is the key to success. I mean, and
Exactly.
nobody does this alone. Nobody does it in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, you got to trust them.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Well, Matt, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to thank you for your time. I found it really insightful. I always enjoy speaking to you about these topics. Look
Likewise,
forward
Dick.
to continuing the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. This is Dick Longoria with my guest, Matt Moseman, and thank him for his time and effort. Appreciate you watching today. If you have any questions, and by all means, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to you, and look forward to seeing you at our next episode of SolidWorks Manufacturing Live.